Welcome to The Explainer, where we're turning one of the oldest stories ever told into a visual journey you're not going to forget. Today, we are walking through the story of the first family, the first rivalry, and the very first crime. Genesis chapter 4.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to follow this pretty tragic story in 4 acts, starting with a simple offering and ending with a choice that echoes through, well, all of history.
Okay, so our story kicks off just outside of Eden, with the first children ever born into the world.
All right, verse 1. We open on a moment of what feels like pure joy. Just picture Eve, holding her firstborn son, Cain. Her words, "I've acquired a man from the Lord." They're not just a simple birth announcement. You can feel the triumph in her voice. She sees this kid not just as her son, but as a direct gift, a promise fulfilled by God himself.
And now his brother Abel enters the picture. And right away, their lives split onto 2 totally different paths. As you can see here, Cain is a tiller. His world is the soil, right? His hands are always in the dirt. But Abel, he's a keeper of sheep. His world is the open field. His focus is on his flock. Think about it. One brother is always looking down at the ground, and the other is looking out toward the horizon.
Verses 3 and 4. And this is the moment where everything changes. It's time to make an offering. So picture Cain. He brings some fruit from the ground, what he had on hand. Then you've got Abel. He doesn't just bring a sheep, he brings the firstborn, the absolute best, the most valuable part of his entire flock. It's really the difference between bringing some of what you have and bringing the very best of what you have.
And here it is, the divine verdict. Imagine God accepts Abel's offering. Maybe the smoke from his altar rises straight and clean right up to the heavens. But God does not respect Cain's. You can almost see his smoke just sputtering, clinging to the ground, a really clear sign of rejection. And you can just see Cain's face twist, his jaw clench. The verse says he was very angry, and his whole expression just fell. That rejection, it is curdled into rage.
So let's move on to the real turning point, where a warning is given and a truly terrible choice is made.
Verses 6 and 7, God speaks directly into Cain's boiling fury. And the warning is one of the most powerful images in the whole book. Sin lies at the door. Just picture a dark panther, crouching right at the threshold of Cain's heart, totally ready to pounce. God's challenge is crystal clear. It wants you, but you have to rule over it. The choice and the power to make it is still Cain.
Verse 8, the first part, the scene gets deceptively peaceful here. The verse just says, "Now Cain talked with Abel his brother when they were in the field." So picture them, they're just walking together, maybe the sun is shining, but there's this chilling undercurrent, right? Cain isn't just talking, he's leading his trusting brother further and further away from any kind of safety.
Verse 8, the second part. And bam! The peaceful scene just shatters. In one sudden violent motion, Cain rose up against his brother and killed him. The first murder. A brother's blood now spills onto the very ground that Cain, the farmer, was supposed to be cultivating. The earth itself is now stained with this crime.
Verse 9, now the confrontation. God's question just echoes across that empty field. Where is Abel, your brother? And Cain's reply, wow. It becomes one of the most infamous questions ever asked. Picture him, totally defiant, dismissive, just shrugging it off. Am I my brother's keeper? He's not just lying, he's rejecting the entire idea that he has any responsibility at all for his brother.
Verse 10, and God's response is just haunting. He says, "The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Imagine the camera zooming right in on that blood-soaked earth. And from that stain, picture invisible sound waves rising up, a silent scream for justice. The very ground has now become a witness to the crime.
Verses 11 and 12. So now comes the consequence, a 3-part curse. First, the cursed earth. The ground he used to farm is now going to fight against him. Picture it just turning to dust in his hands. Second, he's a fugitive, banished, on the run. And third, he's a vagabond, condemned to just wander the earth with no home, forever restless.
But Cain's story doesn't end with the curse. His exile, believe it or not, marks the beginning of a new, separate branch of humanity, one that's born from violence and separation.
Verses 13 and 14. So we finally hear Cain's voice again. But is it remorse? Nope. It's pure terror. My punishment is greater than I can bear. He's not sorry for the crime. He's terrified of the consequence. He's convinced that, as a wanderer, anyone who finds me will kill me. You can just picture him, constantly looking over his shoulder, seeing an enemy in every single shadow.
Verse 15. This brings us to the famous mark of Cain. And you know what? A lot of people get this wrong. It's not a mark of shame. As you can see, it's actually a sign of divine protection. Imagine this kind of supernatural aura around Cain, like a divine do not touch sign. God declares that anyone who kills Cain will face vengeance sevenfold. It's a strange kind of mercy, protecting the murderer from the very cycle of revenge he started.
Verses 16 through 18. And now for the great irony. In exile, Cain, the cursed wanderer, he builds a city. The man who was condemned to have no home creates the first permanent settlement, and even names it after his son, Enoch. And as you can see from this timeline, the guy who broke his family apart goes on to start a long and pretty influential family line. Verses 19 through 22. And check this out. Cain's line produces the world's very first innovators. His descendants literally become the pioneers of civilization. Look at this. Jabal becomes the father of nomadic life with livestock. Jubal becomes the father of everyone who creates music. And Tubal-Cain forges the first tools from bronze and iron. Culture, art, and technology, it all flourishes from this exiled family line.
Verses 23 and 24. But all this amazing innovation is just poisoned by escalating violence. Cain's descendant, Lamech, sings this really chilling song. He boasts, "I have killed a man for wounding me." And then he takes God's protective promise for Cain and just twists it into this terrifying anthem of personal vengeance. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, Lamech declares he will be avenged 77-fold. The cycle of violence is just spiraling way out of control. After the darkness of Lamech's song, the story pivots one last time, away from the line of the murderer. Verse 25. The story now pivots back to Adam and Eve. And after so much darkness, here is this little glimmer of light. Imagine an older Eve holding a new son. She names him Seth, and she says, "God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed." She sees this child as a divine replacement, a new seed of hope that's been planted in the soil of her grief. Verse 26. And finally, we see what grows from this new seed. Seth has a son, Enosh, and with his birth, a completely different kind of legacy begins. In really stark contrast to Lamech's song of vengeance, this family line began to call on the name of the Lord. So instead of violence and pride, we see community, worship, and a turning back towards God. So we're left with these two legacies branching out from that first family. You've got the way of Cain, a path of brilliant but violent self-reliance. And then there's the way of Seth, a path of quiet, communal faith. The story just lays these two paths out before us, asking a question that still resonates today. What legacy do we choose to build?